Morning, everybody. How are you? You good? Good. I'm sorry I was a little late. I think everyone got a bit nervous about whether I'd get here on time. I certainly did. But I do remember being here many years ago at Spurgeon's College, preaching in this chapel. Made a terrible joke about the students in the college who come here to get a BA and work for an MA, possibly a PhD, but definitely a BMW. And it was a terrible joke, because I drove up here this morning in a BMW. It's like, why would I ever say that? But it's been great. It's great to come back. Good to see all the folks who are here. While I was actually doing some revision for one of my exams, I met Dotha Blackwell. She came to our church all the way from Jamaica via America, I think, and helped with my revision one day. So everything I know academically, everything I've ever achieved in my life, I owe it to Dotha. Just want to put that on a record. She helped me do my studies. Now, we've got a few minutes to talk to you this morning. I'm working in an Assemblies of God church in East London, in Walthamstow. All the wise men come from the East, and that's where I live. And it's just a great opportunity to serve God and to be a part of all of this. Now, for those of you that are a little nervous about the AOG tag, I used to go to a Baptist church. Am I good? Okay, fine. So here we are. I asked if I was free to talk about whatever I needed to today, and they said yes, you could share just an inspirational moment for a few minutes. And I said, great. I'd like to talk about not the purpose of offense, but the power of it. You think, well, what kind of thing? We're going to have a communion service, going to be sensitive and lovely. Why do you bring a heavy title like that? Because I know all of you are planning to get involved in ministry. Some probably are already engaged in it. And at some point, this is coming your way. It's not a matter of if. It's going to happen. So you need to be ready for it. And I thought, if I ever have a chance to get with students again, I want to tell them that being involved in ministry is no glamorous thing. It's very difficult, very tough sometimes. And I enjoyed it. I still have a dream for it. I still love what I'm doing. But the reality is dealing with people can be very stressful. They say and do the most amazing things. And I think everybody who gets into the pastoral ministry or in leadership needs to have the heart of a saint and the hide of a rhino. And I kid you not. So let's kick into what we're going to share this morning. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, the writer says, above all, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. When you use a term like above all, you're saying this is important. You're saying this needs priority. So out of your heart will flow something wonderful for people. Great counsel, great concerns, great passions, great desires. It's all wonderful. But it can get polluted and become more clear-ridden than it needs to be if you don't take care of it. If you're not watching and monitoring what's going on the inside of you. And being on the AOG leadership team, as I was for 10 years, working with, something like just over 600 churches and maybe 1,500, 1,600 now leaders. It's not a huge denomination, but it gave me lots of opportunity to sit with ministers and see what goes on in the heart, whether we're monitoring this very, very well. And what I discovered is that sometimes we're not. We had people who got into all kinds of problems. Some in our denomination, some of my friends outside. When it came to money, they had an inordinate affection for money. You don't have to have a lot of money for the love of it to eat up your heart. I had problems with leaders who couldn't contain or control the passions of their loins. And issues of sexual infidelity, sexual immorality happen in our churches. Can I talk about that? Can I be honest enough to talk about that stuff? Yeah. So and that doesn't mean they weren't gifted. I knew a leader who was gifted enough to build a church in London of almost 3,000 people, but he went to jail for 12 counts of sexual assault against the female members of his church, and several of those ladies ended up in my church for restoration. Gifted. But a gifted leader is not enough. You need to be healthy. It's your health as a leader that will dictate the health of the congregations that you lead and the ministries that you embark on. You can be gifted, and that's fantastic. Gifted leaders can build things, but only healthy leaders can build something healthily. And so I'm really concerned that we make sure our hearts are right when it comes to money, sex, or ambition, the unbridled desire to be at the top, to win the rat race. Even if you win the rat race, you're still just a rat. Come on. So I looked at those things, and they were the biggies that we always tell our leaders, and I was involved in that, and I shared that and counseled people through all of that stuff. But I discovered some other things that could also destroy the heart and pollute it. One of them was disappointment. Just having unresolved or unfulfilled expectations. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I found a number of leaders who just checked out for disappointment. Their goals, their achievements in life and in ministry weren't what they thought it was going to be. And they became distracted by other things. So you started off leading a great ministry, a great network of churches. You end up looking after a wine bar in the back of Spain somewhere. What's that all about? This is the one we're going to get to today. The issue of offense. And this second one is probably not spoken about enough. When leaders get hurt and they don't handle it well, you will have this coming your way. People will say something and do something. People you wouldn't expect to say it. People you wouldn't expect to do certain things will do it right in your face in the middle of everything you're trying to do serving Jesus. And you have to know how to handle that well. If you don't know how to handle it well, it will nail you. It will destroy you. So what I'm about to say is very, very important. Look, 2 more scriptures. 2 Samuel. Would you go there, 2 Samuel, if you have your Bibles with you? Maybe you've got it on iPad or iPhone. If you're using an electronic device, God help you when your batteries fail. You know, that's all I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Future's paper for me. All right, 2 Samuel 16, verse 23. I'm moving quickly because time's of the essence here. It says, now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and Absalom. That's 2 Samuel 16, verse 23. Flip over to the next chapter. Same verse, 23. Now Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed. He saddled a donkey, arose and went to his house, to his city. There he put his house in order, hanged himself and died and was buried in his father's tomb. I read those scriptures because I want to know what happens to a guy who goes from an amazing reputation in chapter 16 to an incredible demise in chapter 17. What was going on between those 2 texts? I wanted to find out because, it's very important for me. And when we get to this stuff, I want you to make sure that you're thinking only about your own heart today, right? Don't blame somebody else. We're going to get to some stuff here, because that's what people do. Like the couple that couldn't remember stuff, and they went to the doctor, and they said, our memory is playing up. He said, listen, just grab a little notebook and write stuff down. You'll never forget things again, which worked for a couple of months. And then the husband said to his wife one night, would you like something in the kitchen? I'm going to make a coffee. Do you want anything? She said, yeah, I'd like some ice cream with some strawberries on it and some chocolate sauce. Can you? No, you're not going to remember, are you? Write it down. He said, I'm not going to write it down. The kitchen's just there. I'm not going to forget it. She said, you will. He said, I won't. They started arguing. Eventually he said, leave it to me. So he went to the kitchen. He came back 30 minutes later with a massive big bowl full of scrambled egg. And she said, I knew you'd forget. He said, did I forget something? She said, yes, you forgot my toast. You see, the thing is, we're quite quick to blame other people or look at other people's problems when we're actually in the same position. And when we get to these stories about offense, you might find we're in the same place here. Look, Ahithophel's advice, when it says in 2 Samuel 16, verse 23, that he was wise, he was intelligent, he was a nationally recognized leader, he served 2 political administrations, and it wasn't just his erudition and learning and his skill at doing stuff, it was his anointing. There was a sense of the grace of God about him. Somebody said, when you spoke to Ahithophel, it was as if you put your ear to the heartbeat of God. You felt godly wisdom in his counsel. There was a grace on it. You think that's a tremendous reputation to have. And then we get to this sad story in chapter 17 where he commits suicide based on rejection. It seems to be very carefully planned, very intentional, isn't it? It always is. Went to his house, put his house in order, dies in isolation. I don't know who found him hanging 3 foot from the rafters with a noose around his neck. But what was striking for me was the fact that this was an act beyond reversal. I was drawn into the story because my own mother committed suicide. So I'm kind of reading the story thinking, I know what it's like to get that piece of news. I know exactly what that's like. So what happened, and it drew me into the story because I found the reputation, I looked at the ruin, and I wanted to know the reason. And it became clear to me as I began to read through the story, and you should do your own references in this. I'm only going to reference stuff, so you're going to have to study this out. Sorry, with all those other assignments and bits of preaching you do and all the way, I'm giving you more homework, sorry about that. But the Bible contains some very important clues about the backstory on these 2 texts for me. The first one was his connection to Absalom's rebellion, the wayward son of David who decided he would take the throne from his father. It says in chapter 15, verse 12, he, that's Absalom, also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor. In the book of Chronicles, that kind of counselor is called the king's friend. Please note that. But he came from Gilon, his hometown, and it says, so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. So my first question was, well, why did Ahithophel desert David? And then how do you go from being the king's friend to the king's foe, an advisor to an adversary? What was that about? Or why did you join Absalom? Why did you get into this conspiracy? Why did you join this rebellion? So his joining Absalom's rebellion was significant for me. The other thing that I found was the content of his counsel to Absalom. He said, Absalom, your father's left the palace now because he's running away from you and all that you're doing. Why don't you take the concubine wives that are left, put a big marquee on top of the palace and engage in an orgy? I mean, create the biggest sex scandal this nation has ever gossiped about. That's what you need to do. That was the first part of his counsel. He said, the second thing I want you to do is this. David, as you know, is a very smart man. He won't be out there near the troops. They'll put critical distance between him and the troops so that he's safe. Anything happens to them, the king's light doesn't go out. The great leader is safe. He said, what I suggest you do is find people to track down David and kill him. And then everybody's going to lose their nerve, they're going to lose their confidence, they're going to come running back to you. And I'm going, what kind of advice is that? I mean, you used to drink from like a mountain spring at this man's pool of wisdom. Now it's like sipping from a septic tank. Kill somebody and create a sex scandal. What drew these guys together? Well, this proverb isn't in the Bible, but birds of a feather actually do stick together. And in this story, it's really true. Both Ahithophel and Absalom got together through one thing they had in common. They were both fueled by the fact that King David had offended them. And it fueled a hatred for him. Absalom, what was he offended about? The rape of his sister, Tamar. Now, David had several wives, so not all the children were full brothers and sisters. But Absalom and Tamar were, and he loved her. In fact, he even named one of his own daughters after her. But she got raped by her half-brother Amnon, and it was a horrible story. You can read it there in the text. And it says King David was angry. That's all it says about David. He was angry, but he said nothing, did nothing. David was a lousy father. Well, and that's rude to say. Let's say he was domestically challenged. Okay, let's just, euphemistically speaking. But there's several occasions when he didn't discipline the son, wouldn't put any boundaries around his children. And he couldn't speak into this issue that happened right in his household because he'd lost the moral authority in his house because of his affair with Bathsheba. You can never discipline your children for things that you're doing yourself, can you? And so there's the full rape of Tamar. There's David's anger, but he does nothing. So Absalom plans revenge. His sister comes to stay with him. He says, I'll take care of this. It takes him 2 years. His cousin says he's been thinking about killing Amnon for 2 years. And in every one of those days for 2 years, he's watching a rape victim try to recover. And it says she was desolate all the days of her life. I don't know whether you've ever had a rape victim sit at your table in your house. I have on several occasions. One of the saddest for me was a young girl of 16 raped by 10 guys who, when they finished with her and beat her, poured acid over her genitals. She'll never have children. She's in my church. I'll never forget going to the hospital and standing in the intensive care unit and just opening the door and seeing her body twice its normal size. All the hospital staff came to me and said, Reverend, please don't cry. Reverend, come on. You've got to be strong for the family. Please, Reverend, don't cry. The nurses were trying to console me. You ever had a rape victim come to your house? Absalom saw it. Before you get angry about his rebellion, you've got to try and understand the humanness of this story. And David said nothing. That's why Absalom got up at the gates and said, if there was a problem in the nation and it needed to be sorted, I would sort it. Because in his mind, he's thinking, I'm living in a household where stuff goes wrong and nobody puts it right. As a matter of fact, that's what kings should do. They make rulings, they make decisions, they take charge of things, they make wrong things right, they sort stuff out. And if you're not fit for purpose, then give up the throne. I'll take the job. It's Absalom. Offended. Unforgiveness means we desire to hurt the people who have wounded us. It's like the little boy who was sitting on a park bench in obvious agony. And a man walked by and said, what's wrong, son? And the boy answered, I'm sitting on a bumblebee. And why don't you get up, the man asked. And the boy replied, because I figure I'm hurting him more than he's hurting me. That's the craziness of people trying to get even. But that's Absalom's story, Ahithophel's story. It's a sad one, because I wondered what would make him do that. And I'm reading through the story, and I get to chapter 23. And there's a list of an incredible group of guys, the vanguard of David's leaders, 30 mighty men, a few others on the side. They're not a part of that great 30, but they're still gifted guys. And you're reading down the list. And actually, as I'm reading down that list in chapter 23, two names spring to mind. One is a guy called Eliam, and the other is Uriah the Hittite. I'm thinking, these names sound familiar to me. And they are familiar, because these names were mentioned in chapter 11, verse 3, during the story of David and Bathsheba, when David's supposed to be out leading his army in war, and he's, voyeuristically looking into somebody's bathroom from the top of his house. And then he comes down and says, this lovely looking lady in house 25 just down the road, does anybody know the number? Anybody got an email address? And the servants of the house are very coy around the king. They're trying to be comfortable and careful. And they're saying, isn't this the daughter of Eliam? Isn't this Uriah the Hittite's wife? What they're saying is, these are two of your mighty men. What they're giving the king is a hint the size of Texas, man. Don't go there, David. This can't bode well for you. This is not going to be good. But David, in the heat of those passionate moments, Eliam is Bathsheba's father. Uriah the Hittite is her husband. But the text in chapter 23 says that Eliam is the son of Ahithophel, the Gileadite, which makes Bathsheba his granddaughter. Grandparents are some of the most dangerous people on the planet. If you offend them, they will get in between you and the grandkids and defend the kids against you. There's nothing wrong with eating chocolate at 5 a.m. in the morning. That's grandparents. They'll defend that. I can understand that Ahithophel is a grandfather. And so when David's adultery almost a year later is jogged in his memory with a story from the court prophet called Nathan, he tells a story about a man who has a little lamb in his house. Feeds her, gives her little tidbits. The kids take it under the table and they treat it like a pet till it becomes plump. And the neighbor says, that's the one we're going to barbecue for my friends who are coming into town. And David goes, David's sitting there listening to this story. He's a king, but inside the robe, there's a shepherd boy, isn't there? He's a sucker for a sheep story. And he goes, I want the guy's page number. I want his email address. Is he on Twitter? Where is this joker? And Nathan says, it's actually you. Because in the story, everybody in the family gets affected. The father's going, please don't take my lamb. The kids are going, Daddy, don't let him take it. Everybody in the family gets affected in that story. And Nathan was trying to help David realize that his actions with a little lamb called Bathsheba have set off an earthquake in an entire family. No wonder Ahithophel is offended. Now, he's not here today. I can't exhume his body and bring him into chapel and say, can you tell us your story? I'd love to interview you. So I'm going to have to kind of speculatively think about it. I think if he were here, he would have said, this is why I'm offended. Number one, my service for David was abused. I laid down my life to serve David. I paced the floor at night praying for wisdom and counsel to help him. And that's how he repays me. It's tough when you're serving somebody and it's not your vision. You're doing your best to help. And they kick you in the face. Should I be treated like that? That's what he would have said. Did I deserve that? I'll tell you something else. My son Eliam was amongst the mighty men. What's like going to work every day and around the barracks there's this ugly story about your daughter and your mentor, your hero. Because every little boy in Israel thought, one day I want to grow up to be just like David, a giant killer. Every little kid sang those stories. Saul has killed his thousands, but David 10,000. He was a hero, he was a mentor. He was the guy to be with. And so Eliam grows up and now he's saying, Dad, you tell me, you're the counselor of Israel. What do you do when your mentor seduces your daughter? When your hero fails you that badly? Give me some counsel, Dad, because I need it now. It's one thing for me to get hurt and my service to be abused. It's another thing when you go after my family. It's another thing. Can you handle that? Because sometimes that happens. Ahithophel was annoyed. My daughter, I know my granddaughter wasn't raped. Bathsheba went to the house. She walked into David's bedroom. But the scriptures say a couple of things about David. When you first meet him, he's handsome, he's attractive. Actually, it says he had attractive eyes. So he's a powerful, good-looking man. And she hasn't had her husband around for a long time. It's amazing what a powerful, good-looking man can do to a vulnerable woman. It's amazing. And I'm in pastoral ministry, and I have seen that story repeat itself in too many times for my liking. This is real stuff. This story is real life, guys. It's real. Uriah the Hittite, grandson-in-law, he hasn't got anything to say because he's dead. He's really silent in the story because David sends a memo to the general saying, when you get near to the heat of the battle, draw back from the wall and let them kill him. And that's what they do. But Ahithophel knows. Everybody knows who sent the memo. Everybody knows. It was David. And then there would have been a little baby in the story. First child that Bathsheba ever had, but it died. Under an act of discipline, the child died. David lost that child. When I sent my wife back to Jamaica, every time we had a baby, I sent her back to Jamaica because my wife's from Jamaica. I sent her back 4 times. Now, that's enough money spent. You know what I'm saying? No more kids, man. No more babies. But I sent her back, and she brought some photographs back. And one of them was walking around the family plot of land. And there's her and my son and her mother and her mother's father. And they were all in this picture. And you can see the old man just walking around. I said, what was he saying? And Joan said he was saying, yeah, man. Yeah, man. He was just enjoying that moment. That little picture would never appear in Ahithophel's photo album because the baby died. All because of David. All because of David. And he is stinking mad about it all. Mad enough to kill someone. See, how do you handle offense? You, not Ahithophel, not Absalom, you in this chapel room. When people abuse your service, maybe say things that harm your family, maybe take away opportunity and things that you were dreaming you would do. Say things about you that are not true. Leave you vulnerable. Back away from you when you need them most. How do you handle this, people? Oh, Proverbs 17 verse 9 says, he who covers offense promotes love. Proverbs 18:19 says, an offended brother is more unyielding than a fortified city, a city under siege. Here's the deal with a city under siege. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. I don't care what's inside you, but under siege of an offense, it's very difficult to reach you when you're in that frame of mind. Nothing gets in. But all of the wonderful things that God's deposited in you, every gift, every skill, every talent, every grace, is locked up inside you while you stew in a mindset that says, I want revenge and I want it now. Be careful with that stuff. And in fact, Proverbs 20 verse 22 says, don't say, I will pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord and he will deliver you. Proverbs 24 verse 29 says, don't say, I will do to him as he has done to me. I'll pay that man back for what he did. Don't do that. There was a better way to handle the ugliness of other people's behavior. I want to tell you, in Proverbs 12, verse 15, it says, see to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See to it that nobody misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and to defile many. When you are in the midst of being offended and hurt by what people have done and said, there is a place to find grace to get through it. It is possible, I don't want to sound negative today, it is possible, because of what we're about to see depicted from these emblems, it is possible to find a grace to forgive. We follow a Savior who in the middle of his pain said, Father, forgive them. It's possible to drop those charges, to release people from what you feel you're indebted to, and say, I will not bring this up again against those people. It's time to draw a line and let it go. So important. Hey, here's two stories to tell you how the grace works. In 1946, Czesław Godlewski was a member of a vicious gang of youths that roamed and sacked the German countryside. And on an isolated farm, they gunned down 10 members of the Wilhelm Hammerman family. 9 of the victims died, but Hammerman himself survived his 4 bullet wounds. Godlewski was eventually caught and he served a 20-year sentence for his crimes. When the time arrived for his release, the state refused to let him go. They said he had no address to go to. And when Hammerman heard about it, he made a formal request to have the killer released to his care and to his custody. And in his request, he wrote, Christ died for my sins and forgave me. Should I then not forgive this man? How does that feel, sitting at a table for 10, and now there's only 2 of us, and the guy at the other end of the table killed everybody else that should have been around here, but I welcome him in. That's grace, ladies and gentlemen. It's the grace of our Savior. If this doesn't work for us, what are we doing here? If we can't live in this stuff, every assignment, every preaching opportunity, every seminar has helped you in no way whatsoever. This has to be lived out. This stuff has to be lived out. Another story, and then I'm going to be done. The following account is a description of what happened in a South African courtroom during the dismantling of the apartheid system in that country. The Truth and the Reconciliation Commission granted whole or partial amnesty to the convicted perpetrators of violence. The amnesty was granted in exchange for truth, and so the perpetrators were required to tell their crime story in the presence of their victims. Now, in this particular story, true story, the old frail black lady rose to her feet in the courtroom. She was about 70 years old, and those years were deeply etched on her face. So facing her across the room were several white security police officers. One, a Mr. Vanderbroek, who had been found guilty of murdering the woman's son and husband. The man had come to the woman's house a number of years earlier. He'd taken her son, shot him at point-blank range, and then burned his body while he and the other officers laughed about what they did. And several years later, Vanderbroek had returned to take away her husband as well. And for 2 years, she could learn nothing of what happened to him. Then Vanderbroek came back for the woman herself. And she was led to a place beside a river. And there she saw her husband. He was bound and he had been beaten. He was lying on a pile of wood. And the last words she heard from his lips as the officers poured gasoline over his body and set him aflame were these: "Father, forgive them." But now justice had caught up with Mr. Vanderbroek. He'd been found guilty and it was time to determine his sentence. And so as the woman stood, the presiding official of the court asked, "So what do you want? How should justice be done to this man who has so brutally destroyed your family?" In reply, the woman said, "I want 3 things. I want first to be taken to the place where my husband's body was burned, so that I can gather up the dust and give his remains a decent burial." And she pauses, then continues, "My husband and son were my only family. And I want secondly, therefore, for Mr. Vanderbroek to become my son. I'd like for him to come twice a month to the ghetto and spend a day with me so that I can pour out on him whatever love I still have remaining within me. And finally," she says, "I want a third thing. I would like Mr. Vanderbroek to know that I offer him my forgiveness because Jesus Christ died to forgive. This was also the wish of my husband, and so I would kindly ask somebody to come to my side, lead me across the room so I can take Mr. Vanderbroek in my arms, embrace him, and let him know that he is truly forgiven." And as the court assistants led the elderly woman across the courtroom, Mr. Vanderbroek was overwhelmed by what he heard. He fainted. And quietly, those across the room, friends, family, neighbors, all victims of similar oppression and injustice, began to sing, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see." There is a grace that can be accessed to deal with an offense that's come your way. So here in my concluding thoughts, I would say this: you will be offended at some point in your life and ministry, but you must choose your response. I can't choose if that will happen to me. It will happen. What I can choose is how I respond to it. And I believe if we choose wisely, God will vindicate you. And God will give you life beyond the pain. Can't show you that now, but I got a little butterfly scar on my arm. As a kid, we used to roll down the hills. When I come from school, it was great. A little hill to walk down to my house. We used to roll down it. And one day the council had cut the grass really low. So we all rolled down and we thought we were milk bottles. Actually, I found a milk bottle smashed in the grass. I rolled right over it, split my arm open. I didn't actually see the blood and didn't feel anything until I saw it. It's the truth. Walking down the street and a lady's walking towards me. She goes, "Ah! Look at you!" And I went, "What?" "Ah!" That's when I felt nervous and felt pain. So they said to me, "You're going to go to the hospital. You're going to have stitches." Now, the only needle I'd ever seen is I live with foster parents, and my nan loved to knit, so the needle's about this long. So in the little boy's mind, I'm thinking, no, I was shaking. I was so overwhelmed with fear. When I couldn't talk. My teeth were chattering. The doctors and the nurses were trying to be kind. "Come on, Sonny, it's going to be all right." I'm going, "You're lying. Because I thought it was going to be so painful. And the doctor looked at me and said, "He really is nervous. But I'll tell you what we'll do. It's such a clean cut. If he can keep this wound clean for 1 week, I'll just tape it up and we'll see if it begins to seal itself. If it does, maybe he'll get away with this." I mean, I've never been so attentive to cleaning a wound in all my life. I kept it clean. And when I went back, he went, "Wow, you've done very well, son. I think this is going to heal just fine. We won't need to do the stitches." I'm like, yes. Big lesson for me. If you keep the wound clean, life beyond it. I'm not disabled. I have a story. I have a scar. But the issue is I kept the wound clean. I didn't allow it to get infected with anything that would create more difficulties. I wish more people learn how to do that when they're offended. Grace helps you to keep the wound clean. Because you'll look at these wounds and you will realize, as Jesus told the story about forgiveness, that you will never be owed more than you have been forgiven. That's the story of the guy who went out and choked his friend for 50p when he'd been forgiven an unpayable debt. You'll never be owed by anybody. Whatever they do to you, you will never be owed more than what you have been forgiven. So choose to forgive. Choose wisely. And there's life beyond the pain. Yes?